worked in industry for a fairly long time and came into teaching a couple of years ago and is now responsible for the apprenticeships at the company we work for. It's a textile company, so all the apprenticeships revolve around textiles. And he is also head of our standardization and quality control. And although based in London, working mostly with students in London, he also covers Leicester and Wales. Over to you, Louis.
Thank you. Hi. Yes, so Judy and I work together at the company I work at. And yes, so I run the apprenticeships, I run the quality assurance. And as Judy said, it's all focused around fashion textiles with a kind of specific focused on garment technology, although we call it product technology, fashion studio skills and knowledge. And garment making, stitching, tailoring, there's lots of different opportunities for apprentices across the sort of education provision. And today I'm going to talk about ultimately what the course is, what the courses are, what apprenticeships are in general, how one gets involved with an apprenticeship, and then really what it looks like, what the journey of an apprenticeship is from start to finish, the opportunities that are open to apprentices, the relationship that a tutor has with an apprentice, how an apprentice can go about applying for an apprenticeship, and how the apprenticeships run, basically. So, Dawn, could you open up the presentation, please?
I will do.
I'm going to be saying next slide throughout this because for some reason my computer doesn't want me to present this. So Dawn's very kindly offered to present this, to have it on her screen. So thank you. So yes, Teat and Chat, apprenticeships in fashion. It's really fab to actually have the chance to talk about this. So it'd be good to get some feedback later on. So to start with, what are apprenticeships? So, as an overview, they really are an opportunity for candidates to get a foot in the door. Not everybody wants to go to university. I think there's been, since the 90s, as far as I'm aware, there's been massive drive to encourage everyone to get a degree, which, listen, if it's something that you need and it's something that you're going to use, then great, but it's not for everybody. Some people just desperately wanted to get into work. So an apprenticeship is an opportunity to get your foot in the door and start building those relationships, which ultimately, as we all know, relationships are going to see us through our career. It really helps you learn so much from not just by osmosis, but just by kind of having those conversations with people, in senior positions. So yeah, that's ultimately an overview of what the apprenticeships are. Each one of the apprenticeships has its own requirement. However, they all provide an opportunity to develop what we call KSBs. So that's knowledge, skills, and behaviors within a working and a learning environment. So all apprenticeships operate on a sort of 80% or 20% mode. With all of our apprenticeships, it's 80%, meaning 4 days on the job with the employer, 20%, which is 1 day with the training provider, and ultimately what the apprentice is doing is spending the 4 days on the job, doing various different duties and tasks, and then reflecting on what they are within their training provider time. So that's when they'll spend their time with me. We'll look at the different modules they've got to complete, what knowledge, skills, and behaviors they need to be developing on the job, for them to consciously reflect on that all the time and reflect that into their work, whether that's tasks they complete or whether they choose to submit, for example, let's say a risk assessment they've produced on the job. They can then use that as evidence against the knowledge, skills, and behaviors that they need to sign off in terms of sort of assessment criteria. Next slide, please. Apprenticeships, as an overview again, it's a paid employment with holiday leave, hands-on experience within a specific sector, at least 20% off the job training, although it can be more. And then it's finished with a formal assessment, which leads to a nationally recognised qualification. And those qualifications can either be a diploma, or they can be a qualification from the Institute of Apprenticeships. Some of the courses are split across the two, whereas some of them are just focused on the qualification from IFATE, that's Institute for Apprenticeships, which includes achieving what's called an endpoint assessment, which is a bit like a sort of final major project, which is what some people refer to it as. So that's what I'll discuss today. Next slide, please. So the process, which I'll go into a bit more detail about, but with this, it's really very much about, it starts with employer engagement, meaning that either the employer contacts a training provider, or a training provider contacts different employers and says, have you thought about apprenticeships? Normally what happens is we get contacted by organizations who say, we're thinking about apprenticeships, we're considering what might be good for our team, we've got a levied fund that we want to share, or there's some gaps within our team and we think that'd be great to have an apprentice. Then what will happen is we'll discuss that role with the organization to see which course might be right for them. They need to understand how that needs to be delivered, what their responsibilities are, which are obviously incredibly important, because they need to also be providing opportunities to develop those KSBs as well as the training provider. Then we'll advertise the role as a training provider, and the apprentice will apply for that role through us. The employment process really it happens after candidate eligibility check. So what happens is our operations team will check if the candidate is eligible in the same way that any job would go. The process would be the same, ultimately seeing if they have the right to work in the UK. With apprenticeships, I believe it's 3 years or more that someone has to have been residing in the UK in order to be part of an apprenticeship. Once we've gone through that process and we know that they're eligible from a legal standpoint, we'll enter into the conversation with the apprentice, check that the course they've applied for, if they're eligible for that. We'll do a skills scan, which ultimately checks the knowledge, skills, and behavioural experience they've had already, check it against the level they've applied for. And if they fit that eligibility check, we'll then send the CV to the employer, who will then decide if they want to interview that person. And then, of course, the usual process would take place where the employer meets with the apprentice, either at the training provider or within their own business, and then they start the job. In terms of training assessment plans, that's where the training provider and the employer work together to look at the full course as an overview, what the course entails, the different units, the different modules, the different KSBs, or sometimes they're referred to as assessment criteria, needs to be covered off. Then what we'll do is we'll normally put together a sort of a loose, flexible training assessment plan, which outlines what KSBs we're going to be providing, what KSBs the employer is going to be providing, and where there's any leeway. Apprenticeships are expected to be delivered in a very holistic way, and there are sort of prescriptive orders in which modules need to be completed, but they can be moved around. It depends very much on the role, how that company is operating. With fashion, it's very much about the critical path of the production process. So we look at what point the student is starting within that process, and we might flex the plan based around that. That's when the scheme of work comes into fruition. We will look at the scheme of work that's been created from the criteria that's been set by the organisation, whether that's Institute for Apprenticeships, Skills and Education Group, University of Arts London, wherever it's come from. And the training assessment plan is built around that scheme of work. The next step would be progress reviews. They happen every 8 weeks, every 8 to 10 weeks throughout the on-programme period of the course. And that's really an opportunity for the training provider, the apprentice, and the employer to come together and discuss progress of the apprentice, to really discuss what's been happening on the job, how the apprentice is feeling. Is there anything they specifically need more from the training provider or from their employer? And it's just a sense check to make sure that everything's going smoothly, they're not falling behind, they feel supported, that the employer has a chance to air any concerns or to discuss any achievements they really want to raise with the apprentice. It's a chance to make sure that everything's running as smoothly as possible, that the apprentice feels supported and they feel motivated and encouraged, that the employer also feels the same from the training provider. And then assessment criteria and portfolio of evidence. I've sort of discussed that, but I will go into portfolio a little bit further down the line. So next slide, please. So first stages, I've sort of covered this already, but this is an overview. So the employer reaches out to an apprenticeship training provider. We've got to make sure that, the program we suggest for the employer is the best role that that matches best to the role they have in mind. The training provider will advertise the role, check the eligibility, do the skills scan, assess the candidate's previous skills already, and then check if the candidates are eligible for the role. It's probably important to say at this point that what can happen with apprenticeships is if an apprentice starts and they've already got a little bit of experience already, or knowledge and skills gained, let's say at college or within a job, if they have evidence to kind of use to cross off against any criteria, we can then shorten the length of the course. So some courses will say on program, which means that the period of time that the student is working and evidencing their work and building their portfolio of evidence. during on program, it might be 12 to 14 months. You can then reduce it to 12 rather than 14 because they may have gained experience already. But as long as you can evidence their experience against criteria, then you can use that as, you know, a starting point for the portfolio, and then therefore shorten the on program period. So requirements of the apprenticeship: 16 or over, they've got to be living in England and not in full-time education. So those are the basic requirements that, you know, any apprentice has to meet before they can actually enter into the sort of eligibility check of an apprenticeship. Next slide, please. Off the job learning, on and off the job, sorry, I've sort of touched on this already, but basically off the job is defined as learning which is undertaken outside of the day of work. So that would be the time they spend either with the training provider, which would be with us, with their tutor, which is me, or if they're doing anything outside of their usual work. So off the job can be training, but it can also be if they're at work, but for example, they have been asked by their employer to join some sort of training, which is in addition to their job. So for example, we have an apprentice who's currently being given the opportunity to learn how to use Clothes 3D, which is a sort of 3D design tool to create 3D garments, photoreal 3D garments, which is not something that she's going to be doing with her job right now, but it's in preparation of, so it's addition. So that can also be considered off the job. On the job is very much what they're doing with their employer from 9 to 5, Monday to Thursday, for example, if that's the way the week is structured, and then the Friday would be with the training provider. On and off the job is a really important aspect of apprenticeships, and we have to evidence what they are doing. So we have training assessment logs, which is just a basic Excel sheet or Word, and they write what they've done, the date they've done it on. For example, you know, completed task 1 of unit X, or, you know, completed some training at work. And they'll say, you know, the mode of delivery, so whether it was physical or whether it was an online assessment, and then they'll sign that, and that's just, that builds up, because every single course has a what's called guided learning hours. They'll have to have completed something like, let's say, 560 hours over the course of 18 months of off the job, which, if that is including training with their provider and anything additional, it grows much beyond that number. So yeah, off the job is a key part of the apprenticeship program, and it has to be evidenced. Next slide, please. So apprenticeship salary, age 16 to 18, the current national minimum wage for an apprentice is £4.81 an hour. Age 19 or over, the current is the same as national minimum wage. In the first year only, age 19 or over and have completed the first year, they're entitled to the national minimum wage. So only at the point of age 19 and having completed the apprenticeship for a year are they then eligible for the national minimum wage. This is something that I always make sure that apprentices are fully aware of when they first start, because it's something you have to dig around a little bit to find on the apprenticeship salary website for salary. So when we start discussing apprenticeships with the employer and the apprentice, we make sure that this is part of the initial information they have, so that they're fully aware of what they're going into. Next slide, please. Apprenticeships in fashion. So these are some of the apprenticeships that we deliver, the ones that we have schemes of work for and that are most popular. So there's the level 2 sewing machinist, there's the level 3 garment maker, the level 3 fashion studio assistant, fashion textiles product technologist, which for us would be garment technology. There's the level 4 pattern cutter, and there's a level 5 bespoke tailor. The most popular, and the ones that we have delivered consistently since I've been in my role, are fashion studio assistant and fashion textiles product technologist. So the roles that the apprentices have within those jobs are working in the fashion studio, either as a kind of assistant designer, or they're working with the buying team, or they're working with like a small brand. We have some apprentices who work with tiny made-to-measure brands, and that would be fashion studio assistant. And that covers everything from managing the studio to developing samples, developing patterns, dealing with the buying process, managing critical path. It's a very dynamic course. And then fashion textiles product technologist is very much working within a garment technology department, normally within a much bigger company, because the program itself is designed very much for an apprentice to work alongside a garment tech team, looking into quality assurance, looking into the production process, everything that happens after the design, the first sort of design stage, once it gets handed over to garment tech, and managing it all the way through to distribution. Oh, there's some questions. Should we do questions now, or should I move on? Keep moving on.
I just said, Louis, that we'll do them at the end, if that's all right.
Oh yeah, no problem.
Yeah, it's easier for you to carry on, and then we'll just do them at the end. I'm keeping track of them.
No problem. And next slide, please. So what I'll do is I'll go through some of the sort of the overview of each of the course. So sewing machinist is a 15 to 21 months. So that's on program, like I was saying. So if we have a machinist who comes to us who's already got, let's say, 2 years as a machinist, if they can, if they have evidence that we can use to then, put against the criteria, we can reduce it to 15 months. If they have no experience whatsoever, as this is a level 2, we can go to the full 21 months. And then the endpoint assessment is an additional 3. And I'll talk about the endpoint assessment a bit later. The key responsibilities would be organisation and maintenance of an efficient workstation, operating different test specialist sewing machines, so overlockers, flatbeds, adhering to health and safety rules and regulations. So for example, where I work, the hair has to be held up. If a machine if there's any issues, the machine needs to be turned off. When you're operating with machines, you can't be using any sort of pins. You have metal policy in most companies to make sure that garments don't have little shards stuck in them, for example. It's all very much health and safety is a major part of that course. Working with a variety of different materials, threads and trimmings. So they'll have tasks where they'll do different stitch types with the denim, understanding about the different tools they need to use, the different needles, versus how to finish off garments made out of silk, French seams, hand rolling, all the different kind of finishes, using a variety of different sewing production techniques and methods. Excuse me. Producing different sewn items that meet quality standards, targets and deadlines, interpreting and following instructions, technical specifications, monitoring and maintaining the workflow, and then routine machine maintenance. So this course is very much preparing a machinist to work in either a luxury sector or high street, really, because every single one of the units is very much focused on the quality of work. In terms of, it doesn't really focus too much on speed, because that's something that comes very naturally with different people. And obviously it depends which sector you want to go into. If you're working in a fast fashion factory, speed's very important, of course. Whereas if you're working with a luxury brand, you're going to take a lot more time to make one garment. So it very much depends on which pathway they want to take. Next slide, please. Garment maker. So I think garment maker is, from my experience, very much a course that blends the sewing machinist and fashion studio, because it's that one step further into being more involved with the design team. So when I think about this course, I think about my time working in brands like Hobbs and Joseph, where the machinist is very close to the designer, very close to the pattern cutter. They are part of the process, really. They'll make suggestions about finishes. When I've worked in brands where we had a pattern room and a sample room, I'd go to the machinist, the garment maker, and say, I'm not quite sure how to finish this. This is the price we need to meet, but I don't want the quality to be too low. I really like a lovely finish with this. What would you suggest? And they're very much more part of the design process and the finishing. So whereas a sewing machinist is just literally making the garments, a garment maker is a bit more hands-on and has more of a relationship with the collections they're producing. So this is 27 months maximum. Again, that's just on programs. This is a very long, one of our longest courses, and the endpoint assessment is 4 months. Key responsibilities would be making sure that the garments are, anything they're producing is, absolute excellence. This is very much more premium product, I would say. It's about the assembly of the garment, the finish, and really how the end product looks. That comes back to having more of a stake in the design and the finish of the garment, rather than just putting the pieces together. Throughout the construction of the garment, they're much more involved. They need to meet design brief, which includes specifications and quality standards. So they're also going to be involved with the tech team as well. So it's a very pivotal role. They must work efficiently on their own, but also part of a team. So again, having that contact with different departments. Duties include quality checking, making sure that the systems are operated well, that materials are available and also processed efficiently. They need to understand about the end use of different products. So for example, if they're making something woven versus something that's stretched, how to finish that garment, how that garment needs to be handled carefully to make sure the finish is the best possible finish and the standards are high. Quality checking, making sure that workstation is efficient. They might also have a part to play in managing a team of other machinists. They'll have both kind of hand sewing techniques and also machinist techniques, understanding how to assemble and finish lots of different garments, and also being able to provide suggestions on better finishes. So again, that comes back to having that stake in the process and how the product actually is going to look in the end. So this is a really interesting course, I'd say, because it's that kind of as I say, pivotal role. I've said that already, but anyway. Next slide, please. Fashion studio assistant. So this one is 22 months total, and there isn't really an opportunity to reduce this. You can, it can go from 14 to 22, but it's such a big course that normally we take apprentices who haven't got a great deal of experience in this, so they have the opportunity to really dive into the entire process. It's also unlikely that people, in my experience at least, have come from, a lot of this, what you learn in this course, you won't necessarily be covering in college, because it very much is about being in a professional team within a fashion studio, in a company that has a pattern room, or a company that has designers that will start from they'll start the design process right from the design brief, rather than necessarily working with suppliers. It's very much a more premium brand that has a fashion studio system. Not always, but normally, in my experience, the apprentices we've had on this course have worked directly with designers, people that own their own businesses, or design teams within a luxury brand. So the key responsibilities would be working with a team that create collections. So that's obviously the designers, the buyers, the merchandisers, the pattern cutters, and the garment techs. They really are working with every single person within a traditional team. This apprenticeship will introduce candidates to the design and fashion industry, with experience gained both in the product and commercial side of the brand. So that's everything from start to finish. So from the initial design brief all the way through to promoting the collection online, its presence online. They've got to understand about how to promote garments, understand about marketing and styling, and the relationship between fashion and art and photography, and also the commercial sides of the brand. So its presence online. There's a lot of opportunities within this course to understand about sort of contemporary modes of promotion. So influencer culture, how fashion is interpreted, how it's sold in incredibly new ways that have never been seen before. For example, like purchasing on TikTok, purchasing on Instagram. And also there's a lot of opportunity in this course for students to critique the industry. We talk a lot about sustainability. There's a lot of, within all the criteria, it asks the student to question and suggest ways to improve processes, to think about sustainable practice, ethical practice, lean manufacturing processes. It's very much preparing apprentices for the future of the industry, which is, the demand for smaller, slower is growing and growing. And I think this course really does address this. This is one of the courses that's been designed by University of Arts London, which of course, as if anyone has an awareness of the UAL, which I'm sure you will do, they have the Centre for Sustainable Fashion. It's incredibly important for them to develop a whole new generation of fashion professionals that think on a wider scale. It's being commercial, but in a much more sort of people and planet oriented mode. So this is a really interesting course. This is one of my favorite courses to teach, because it's just it covers everything, and it gives an apprentice an opportunity to have a stake in every single department, and also develop their assertiveness and their ability to critique fashion, and whilst being positive about it and love fashion, but move it forward into a much more sort of ethical and happier place than it has been before. Normally apprentices will be focused more in the fashion studio, but in a smaller company, they might be involved in other areas of business. So one of our apprentices worked at Amazon, and they were in a huge design team, whereas I had another apprentice that worked with a made to measure with just one designer and one sewing machinist. And she was handling absolutely everything from answering the phones to selecting fabrics to booking models. Whereas the person who was working for Amazon, they were doing range plans and updating the critical path. So, it depends very much on the company you work for in terms of what you're actually doing on the job every single day. This course is interesting as well because it's split into three. So we deliver the product development pathway, whereas they also have the fashion and marketing, communications, or sales and operations pathways. Where I work right now, we're currently looking into whether or not we may be able to also deliver the other two pathways, but our focus is product development, which is very much about the product and the design process. And next slide, please. Fashion Textiles Product Technologist. So this is one of the long ones as well, 26, 27 months maximum. Again, you can't really reduce this course down. It's so involved, and there's so much scope within it that they need a long time to really get their feet under the table with the role, understand their position within the company. It's heavily involved and focused on quality. So this has a 27 months on program and 20 weeks, so roughly 5 months endpoint assessment process. Within this role, they need to evaluate new product designs, support the production or sewing product samples, support the team, sample review, evaluation, approval, a lot of risk assessments, a lot of fabric testing, producing product specifications and production instructions, identifying suitable materials and accessories, analyzing product returns and faults, supporting the production and distribution process, looking into costing and budget management, quality assurance and control, and then, as I said before, production risk assessments. So this is very much focused on making sure that products that go out to market are fit for purpose. This course focuses heavily on sort of legal requirements with regard to labeling. It looks into, again, sustainability, about the supply chain. We talk a lot on this course about where garments are being sourced, where fabrics are being sourced. We talk about companies that are operating on a much smaller scale, that are much more conscious. We look into a lot of brands that have impact reports where they're always reviewing their processes and improving their processes. And there's a lot of focus on, as I've said before, sort of people, planet, and profit in that kind of order, rather than it being all about sort of like-for-like growth. This really encourages the students to think about improving quality and also improving a company's corporate social responsibility as well. So this is another course that really gets the students to critically analyze, think outside the box, think about the future of fashion. This one as well, along with Fashion Student Assistant, I find really, they're really broad, and they give the apprentice an opportunity to grow, analyze, think, and develop their assertiveness within their career, which is incredibly important. Finding a way to be assertive in a way that suits your personality, to lead teams, to inspire people. It's another really, really strong course that we did about. Next slide, please. And the pattern cutter. So this is another long course, 27 months. The in-point assessment, I believe, is 4 months. This is about interpreting given sewn product design briefs, drafting prototype patterns that meet specifications and reflect given designs, working with a sample machinist to produce product. So this is a course that an individual that work quite closely with the garment maker. So there's a lot of interfacing between those two courses. We don't currently deliver the garment maker, but if we did, I would have these apprentices working together to understand what that looks like in the real world. Reviewing and assessing product samples, adjusting the prototype patterns to meet required design and fit specifications, creating final master patterns, and supporting the cutting and production process. So this course is very much about manual and 3D or 2D pattern cutting processes. So where I work, we have Gerber, we have Optitex, and we're also looking into delivering Clo 3D. So this is another another course that gets the students to think about more sustainable practices. So, for example, if they're cutting 3D, they're reducing the amount of paper they're using, they're reducing the amount of garments they're producing. Doing garments, producing patterns and kind of garment samples via 3D is a really interesting way of evaluating the design process without having to produce so much. So this is a really interesting course. We currently don't deliver this, so I haven't actually ever delivered this in my role, so I don't have as much experience to talk upon with this one. I know that when I was working with Julia, a lot of our pattern cutting apprentices would work directly with Julia. Julia's a master pattern cutter and has worked directly with our apprentices on this before. And pattern cutting is a magnificent skill. So I think that anyone who would deliver this pattern would need to have a very strong, this course would have to have a very strong knowledge of pattern cutting to be able to support the apprentices and to push them outside of their comfort zone in terms of developing really incredible skills with developing garments. Next slide, please. And then Bespoke Tailor. So when I joined my current company, 2 apprentices were on their way to finishing this course. This is an interesting course because when I think about apprenticeships for me always look like apprenticeships on Savile Row. That was my first understanding of what apprenticeships are. I know Savile Row's had apprentices for since the beginning of Savile Row, where they're all developing their skills on the job every single day. The Bespoke Tailor apprenticeships are level 5, and it is a chance to formalize the process of developing the skills of a bespoke tailor. So the apprentice will either choose, they'll do core skills and knowledge, and then they'll choose either to do a cutter or a tailor pathway. They're producing tailored garments that are cut and made to unique patterns. Many of the skills are carried out by hand. This is a very hands-on role. And obviously, being a tailor is very much about, working very much to a customer's requirements. So this course gives the apprentice the opportunity to really understand about how to be a salesperson, as well as a sort of a confidant. You're spending a long time with clients when you're producing garments for them. It's very much an intimate sort of role. So it's not just about developing skills and knowledge, it's also developing core behaviors, how to be sensitive, how to be very professional in a very sort of slick environment. Most of the apprentices we've had with this have worked for tailors on Savile Row, although this has been developed and is being developed further to roll out to off Savile Row tailors. It can be delivered with anybody, and there is a growing popularity in tailors across the country. Bespoke tailors and cutters have practical skills in bespoke garment manufacturing and pattern construction. This program is put together with mandatory core skills knowledge, and then they get to choose, as I said, between either doing cutting or tailoring as a career. They cover a wide area of expertise that include craft, technical, creative, and design, which are all fundamental, but it's ultimately about precision, incredibly high standards, working to realistic time constraints, and as I said, having a really, really good outfacing relationship with customers and building a really strong bond. And then the endpoint assessment. So each of the standards now have endpoint assessments. Previously, there were frameworks which are still delivered in Wales, but in England and Northern Ireland, I believe it's endpoint assessments. The endpoint assessment is ultimately like a final major project would be within university or college. The endpoint assessment is different for every single course, but ultimately they all come down to getting the apprentice to think about a solution within the business. So for example, with Fashion Studio Assistant, they are asked to consider an issue the company has and how that would be countered. So I know one of our apprentices was thinking about how they would increase their presence online without a huge budget. Another apprentice was thinking about how to improve the production process. Some of them were thinking about different systems that could be implemented. It's normally focused around sort of critical thinking, how to improve the business. A lot of my apprentices are talking about, suggesting ways in which the company could be more sustainable, could be slower, to produce smaller collections that are focused more on quality. Going back to impact reports, a lot of the apprentices that come through are thinking about how to improve the sort of carbon footprint of brands. So they're all focused on critical thinking and analysing the way in which businesses operate today. And what they do is they put together a project, they'll present that project, and then there will be a line of questioning and a test. And that all takes place with the apprentice's line manager and independent assessor that's completely independent of the training provider and the employer. And it's normally takes place over 1 or 2 days. So the endpoint assessment is normally runs over about 4 to 5 months, but then it will be broken up into different stages where the apprentice will have the initial conversations with the independent assessor. They'll set a date when they submit their project, and they'll set a date for when they present. So they can do it in less time than is prescribed, but it depends on when they want to actually submit. So the endpoint assessment is an integral part of every single apprenticeship now in England and Northern Ireland. It's what they are part of the standards, is what they're called. Next slide, please. Oh, that's it. I should have put an end or something. Yes, so that really is basically the end of the apprenticeships, is the endpoint assessment. So I guess now we'll go into questions. I've seen lots of them popping up, so I look forward to answering any questions.
Hi, Louis. There's 2 directly on your screen there. Is there a degree apprenticeship, as this seems to be a popular request this year? I've noticed that a lot of the courses are nearly the same length as degree, probably longer, but considering how long when you do a degree course, you don't do very many hours.
So no, none of them are degree level. So level 5 is the closest to a degree, but they're not, if that's the question, they're not degree level. You don't walk away with a degree, you don't walk away with a sort of Institute of Apprenticeships qualification.
Okay, thanks. But they are about the same length of time, some of them, aren't they?
Yes, yeah.
And are there any plans for a further level 5 course apart from the bespoke tailoring? I have many year 13 students who would love to do this, but with a more textiles fashion focus.
As far as I'm aware, I'm not aware of anything else that's a level 5 other than the bespoke tailoring.
It's a shame. It'd be nice to do more.
Sphere.
Thank you. Has anybody got any other questions?
Can I just go on, just to answer them. I think when you're talking about apprenticeships, it's a good idea to think slightly out of the box away from degrees, because the courses in themselves are equivalent in a lot of ways to actually having a degree, but because you're getting the experience physically there in the workplace, what you end up at the end of it is actually something that's very, very employable. And most apprentices will go on to be employed often by the people that they've worked with, or go on to be employed by the people, but often with the people they've worked with. So from a design point of view, having been a designer all my life, and for anyone else of us who've been there, we know that you show your degree probably for the first job you ever do, and no one ever thinks about that degree again. What they think about is what your talent is, your work experience, and what you can deliver. So sometimes it's thinking that actually it's a field where the degree is less important in the long term, unless you want to go into teaching, than it is in actual practice that you get from. So the level 4 and the level 5 are a very, very high standard, where the level 2 and level 3 are sort of more like doing an A-level or a BTEC or something, but the 4 and 5 are equivalent in a lot of ways, but they are not a degree. Is that about right, Louis?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. So I think it really is. It's about so much of what's important in a career is about understanding how to work with different people. And I think when you go to university, at least in my experience, and what I've got a few friends who are lecturers in universities, it's not giving the apprentices, students, the opportunity to really develop those personal skills. That's why apprenticeships are focused on knowledge, skills, and behaviours, because it's understanding how to collaborate with different people, gives them the opportunity to constantly push themselves outside of their comfort zone, to develop relationships with people, and understanding how to support different people, and also how for them to support you. It really sets people up, sets apprentices up to go into the working world with professional skills that are sort of far beyond what you'd learn at university. As a different way in which you can go rather than going to university. So yeah,
I love the fact that you teach behaviours, and the whole emphasis that you put on that, I think, is amazing. I think they must leave an apprenticeship with so much more knowledge than just pure skills.
Well, that's the thing. I talk a lot with my students about assertiveness. Assertiveness seems to be, or has in my life been, a sort of a dirty word, which I don't understand at all, because I think people attach an aggressiveness to the word assertive. Whereas if you can find a way to be assertive, suits your personality, it puts you in a position where you can manage difficult situations. You know, where everyone's been in work where you take on a workload because you don't want to say no, and then you think, ooh, I've taken on too much, rather than actually saying, okay, this is what I need to do. You know, how can I manage this? This is what I've thought about. I talk a lot with my students about managing up within businesses and how to kind of deal with conflicts, how to support other people within the team, how to best support themselves, how to sort of understand their self-worth, how to manage relationships within the workplace that nobody talks about in university. It just isn't ever discussed. I wasn't prepared how to deal with those. I was lucky in university that we did a lot of critiques, so I understood how to take critiques, but I had no idea how to manage them back, you know, and taking the emotion out of things sometimes, and looking at work processes in a little bit more sort of a streamlined way. So I've had a few apprentices who've come into the apprenticeship quite shy, and they've come to me a few times and said, you know, I've got this workload which is huge, and I'm not quite sure how to manage this. I don't want to say no, but I was so, you know, I've got so much on my plate, I've got too much to learn. So I've talked about how to break that down, how to ask for what you need, which is something that I wish I'd learned when I was younger. And that's something that really is talked about in the apprenticeships. I think with the apprenticeships, because they're working between, they're going into work 4 days a week, coming into a tutor, they can discuss those issues. I've had so many conversations with apprentices where they've talked about situations that have happened at work and scenarios, conversations, and they said, you know, how could I handle this in the best possible way? I want to be professional, but I also want to manage this in a way that I don't feel overwhelmed, or I can learn as much as I can. I want to push into that direction. I want to be more involved with that team. How can I do that without stepping on somebody's toes? Or how can I do that without coming across as pushy, another word that people use, whereas, you know, I say it's not being pushy, it's about being assertive. So I think that, going back to what you said, behaviors, how to manage one's behaviors, and how to take care of your mental health within the workplace is something that's immensely important, and something that we just doesn't get talked about enough. It's talked about a lot now, but with the apprenticeship, you get to have that space to do that. And of course, in those progress reviews, there's been times in progress reviews where the apprentice said to me, okay, so, you know, I really want to ask for the opportunity to start joining certain meetings. Can you help me broach that conversation? And then I'll open that door and then leave it to them to discuss it, you know, or I'll give them advice how to do that, and then they'll go away and do that, and I'll say, how did it go? You know, is there anything I can do to step in here, or do you need me to just step back? That's the beauty of apprenticeships, because you're on the job, you're learning constantly how to manage those relationships. I think with apprenticeships as well, when you're doing a normal job without you know the opportunity to learn, you're not really thinking about what you're learning, other than within the quarterly reviews you have. You know, we've all been in jobs where you spend 6 months and then you sit down with your boss and they say, right, how's the last 6 months been? You think, oh God, I haven't really thought about that. Whereas with the apprenticeships, you're constantly reviewing what you're learning. You're constantly thinking about how you've handled situations, how well you did with a particular task, or maybe you didn't feel you did particularly well about it, analysing why, learning how to support yourself and not berate yourself. I mean, in my early years of my career, you know, I had a lot of anxiety and I chastised myself constantly about things. I didn't have anyone else to really talk to about it. So with the apprenticeships, you've got a mentor at all times in those first few years in the working world, which really set you up to succeed.
I'd love to have had you when I first started working, Louis. You'd have been brilliant. That would have been amazing. To have you one day a week would have been a pure dream. There's another question here, a really good one actually, because I have also done a careers seminar, and I struggle to find this. Students struggle to find apprenticeships. They're not advertised in one place. Where would you advise they look?
Well, I think it depends on the sector. So obviously with fashion, there's UK FTs, that's UK Fashion and Textiles Forum. There's Institute for Apprenticeships. There is Skills and Education Group. Those are the main places I'd look at. Oh, and Education Skills Funding Agency. So our government website isn't particularly good. It doesn't really, the information is quite limited, which I've found when I've tried to sort of find information out, it's not easily accessible. So yeah, UKFT, ESFA.
Is it possible to put those on the end of the slide, do you think? Because then when they pick up the downloadable slide, they can pick them up on the bottom. I think that'd be great.
Yeah,
if we could add those on.
I was going to put them on the link and I completely forgot to do that. So
I can see Dawn writing them down now quickly, but if we could put them on.
I can't remember what you were saying. Can you also can you also put links to where they are?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
That would be perfect.
I annoyed myself actually. I do this with all the work. When I send things to students, I put like a host of links. So yeah, I apologise.
That would be amazing. So Victoria, hopefully if you download the PowerPoints at the end, which will be on our resources, I assume, Dawn, within the next few days. They will be,
but not until Louis put the new slide
in the next few days.
I will. I'll do that.
We'll add them on to the end. Victoria's just said amazing, Louis, thank you. I just wondered if there's any other questions, anybody, if you've got any. You don't have to, you could just sound out and take your mute button off. Come on, Faye, you normally ask a question. Sorry, Faye, just put you in the deep end there.
I haven't actually got a question this time. It was really thorough, actually. It was really thorough, actually, wasn't it? It was
very thorough.
Yeah.
He really knows his stuff, doesn't he?
Yeah.
I talk a bit too fast, but anyway.
No, we all do. I think
it's also worth noting with apprenticeships. You know, when you go and do a degree course, it's usually in fashion, and your aim is to go in there and be a fashion designer. Of which very few people who actually go to university are going to end up actually being fashion designers. So when you're looking at apprenticeship courses, you can be looking at things like a technologist, where you might never have thought really of that because you love creating, but you haven't thought of being a technologist. And technologist, if you get with a company that manufactures in different places in the world, you can be traveling all the time. It's actually a wonderful job. You know, people don't necessarily think about being a pattern cutter because it's not, it's that whole sort of fashion thing driven there, but there are lots of good jobs for pattern cutters, and it means that you're in the industry and you're part of it, and you know, structuring the garment is just as important as designing the garment. So I think these apprenticeships leave you open to actually finding a field within the field that you really enjoy and can progress through it, where often with a degree it's so art and fashion based that you lose out on all the other aspects. I mean, we certainly trained in our courses as pattern cutters and seamstresses, a lot of ex-BA students, because they hadn't had that foundation where your apprenticeship gives you that foundation.
Yeah, definitely. I think you're completely right, Julia. With apprenticeships, you are meeting lots of different individuals within a business in a way that when I was at uni, there's such a focus in, you're so close to what you're doing, you're not thinking outside of your own realm. Whereas when you're an apprentice, the nature of the course is encouraging you to go and build relationships with different people. And I was encouraged to do that when I was young, and I would just wander around every hour to go and get a cup of tea and talk to different people and understand what they do. And then you understand, you know, why having a relationship with someone in human resources might be helpful, someone in the accounts team might be helpful. You know, it's so easy to think, oh, I'm only going to work with that person, but actually relationships, again, building relationships, understanding how they can benefit your daily experience. It's not just from a transactional perspective, oh, I can help you with this if you can help me, but I think it does prepare people to have a much more enjoyable career because they don't become cliquey. It can be quite, especially in fashion, it can be very easy to sit in your department and never really move outside of it. And that's an experience I've had in some companies where, because you've always been so isolated and everyone goes off in their little team when they're at university, whereas with apprenticeships, you're an apprentice in a company, might be other apprentices there, but generally you're with your manager and you're being kind of encouraged all the time and told, you know, in order to evidence this knowledge, this skill, this behavior, you need to go and start talking to the tech team, you need to start talking to the merchandising team, you need to go and maybe you need to ask if you can start joining some daily trade meetings, or, you know, see if you can sit and shadow some meetings that are being had between accounts and merchandising to understand where they get their open to buy budgets from, for example. Understanding the entire mechanism of a business rather than just your one little bit. I think that's the beauty of apprenticeships. You are forced outside of your comfort zone all the time, which is something we all need. I think not all the time, but a lot of the time it's important for us to know how to handle big changes. There was another question there, I think.
Yeah. This is, can you see it?
Can
you see it, Louis?
Sorry, I'm miles away.
Yeah. What employability and specific skills make students stand out? Oh, what employability and specific skills would you say make students stand out in an interview? Number one thing would always be their genuine interest in something. You know, it can be, I think a lot of the time, not a lot of the time, there are times when you can sense that a learner might be unsure what they're going to do, and they're doing it because they think they should rather than they generally want to. So I think when someone's coming to interview, if you can sense that they have a genuine sort of a need to know the information they want to know, they've done a bit of research beforehand, and they've got some really good questions, some specific questions. I think that's really, really important in interviews, for the candidate to actually pose questions about the business to understand where it goes. Like going back to what I was saying about students wanting to focus on environmentalism, for example, a lot of candidates will be unafraid, especially younger people now, they're unafraid to go, so what are you doing about, you know, the global crisis? I mean, they may not ask it in quite such a pointed way, but I think that really stands out as impressive because they aren't afraid to challenge, and you know, they're assessing if it's the right company for them, which I think is really interesting. Obviously not everybody has that. Some people just really want to get their foot in the door and they're not sure yet, but I think confidence, that they are having a, you know, that they want to come in and enjoy their job. I know that doesn't work for everybody, but I think those are skills that would, well, okay, I focus much more on sort of personality here. Skills, it's hard to assess skills in an interview, I think. When a candidate's coming for an apprenticeship, they really are approaching the apprenticeship from coming from a place where they don't have any knowledge. And that's the point, really. You're coming to an apprenticeship without having any of that background. It's mostly based on passion and, you know, really focused interest on that specific area. or it could be that they just really want to understand about the industry. I've got some students who come in and they just want to get their foot in the door, whereas some candidates will come and they say, I really want to focus on knitwear eventually. So then I have to try and say that could be a part of it, but you know, your apprenticeship is about learning about the entire development process of a garment and its life cycle. But I think the main things would be passion, a genuine knowledge, and you know, a sort of a confidence, whether that's subtle or not. Does that answer the question? Maybe I've just waffled on there.
I think you're quite right. I mean,
Thank
a lot
you.
of the students that we've apprenticeship hired in the past, or who got hired in the past, enthusiasm was the strongest thing they came across. They weren't expecting them to know everything, but enthusiasm, showing that actually they have an interest. So if they've actually done a little portfolio booklet or something they do because it's something they thoroughly enjoy, then showing that is also worthwhile. But they're not expecting them to know lots of things. They just want to know that actually they'll turn up for work on time, they're enthusiastic about doing things, that they are happy to get totally involved in things that maybe aren't things they particularly want to do, but it's a learning curve. And I think that's my experience of people that have been hired through the apprenticeship scheme have often been on that level.
I think the word I couldn't find just now is commitment, which is basically what you've just said. I think that's the most important thing. You want to know that they're coming in and they genuinely want to do it, that they are committed. I think that's the best thing. That's what I would look for when I'm looking at candidates and they're asking questions. You can tell the ones who are just not sure and they just want to get a job, whereas somebody who really wants to develop in a company and they're committed. They're going to really take responsibility and throw themselves into it. And like Julia says, not be afraid to get stuck in things that, you know, going outside of your comfort zone again, just willing to learn what they can and push themselves.
Thank you, everybody. Is there any other questions before we leave? I think we've come to the end of it, haven't we? Can't see anybody else asking. Thank you so much, Louis. That was really, really interesting. And I think that I've had quite a few people who said that they couldn't make it tonight and wanted to know if we were recording it, and we are recording it. So this will be going up on our YouTube. And will be available hopefully by the end of the week. We'll also be putting up the presentation with the additional slide with the links and all the different bits of information. That will be going up on the website as well, so look out for that. But just to say thank you very much, Lou. That was really, really interesting and very informative. So
you're very welcome.
Well done. Very welcome.
I'll do those links as soon as I can.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, and hopefully see you at the next Tea and Chat. I've been very bad and I can't remember when it is, but it'll be in a month's time. So we'll see you then, and yeah, enjoy the rest of your night. Thank you.
Everybody. Take care. Bye.